Hey, what's going on, guys? Room Gaming here. We're back at it again with another video. Today's episode, we're taking a look at the Elemental Shaman Mythic Plus guide for Season 2 of The War Within. This is patch 11.15. If you are watching this video in a future patch, just know that this is probably pretty up to date. There might be some things that change. Sometimes the entire spec, like the entire hero talent tree, might change. So just make sure that you're going in and like you're checking Raider IO, Wowhead, whatever. Make sure you're running the most up-to-date talents. But as of creating this video, this is up to date. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Also, if you want to follow along, there's a link in the description. Just click that link. It'll take you out to the website and you follow along with us here. So currently, Elemental Shaman is considered A tier. So if we take a look at Archon GC, you can see that we're sorting by high keys here for Mythic Plus. And they are right below Enhancement Shaman. Honestly, it is neck and neck. It's been this way for most of the season between these two specs. And they're both really just in a great spot at the moment. So taking a look from a range caster perspective, they're sitting at 1 to the number 3 overall spot. So if we scroll down here and we just sort by overall DPS, we can take a look. 1, 2, sitting perfect right at the number 3 spot, right below Balanced Druid. So the damage numbers are definitely there for AOE Shaman. You know, it's not just their utility that's carrying them. They do pump out a lot of damage as well. Taking a look at max key, their highest key is a 20 so far. That will probably jump up to a 21 pretty quick. So yeah, again, overall, just in a really good spot. Let's go back and take a look at some of the pros and cons here. First pro is obviously their utility. They bring both Lust and they bring the Sky Fury buff, which can give mastery to the entire party. A lot of times this right here is just simply enough to get them invited to a group, but they bring so much more than just this, right? They bring this, they bring Lust. They also bring insane mob control. We have the Cat Totem, we have our Thunderstorm Totem, or excuse me, our Thunderstorm ability. They can be used back to back and completely lock down a pack for like 3 to 4 seconds. Something that is not on this list is our Wind Shear. That's our interrupt. We have the shortest cooldown range interrupt in the game. So overall, you know, that just takes us to this point. We just have great mob control overall with Cat Totem, Thunderstorm, and our Wind Shear. We have our Ascendance, so we do a ton of burst damage through that. We also have very good mobility. We have our Ghost Wolf, and then not only Ghost Wolf, but a talent that I really like to run, and that is our, where is it at? Our Gust of Wind right here. So this is on a 20-second cooldown, and this will shoot you forward, and this is, in my opinion, super OP. A lot of people are running Spirit Walk, though, over Gust of Wind, so it's kind of a preference thing. I like to run Gust of Wind. Just be careful of it because it does shoot you forward, and it can get you into a bad situation. Now, not everything is perfect playing Shaman. They do have some cons as well. So if we look at the cons here, you have a lot of keybinds, and a lot of that is just due to Shaman. You know, they run totems. You know, it's been this way since Classic WoW. Now, you used to have your own totem tracker where you'd have to individually go through like the fire and the water totems and kind of have their own separate UI just for the totems because you have like 30 on you at any given time. Okay, probably an over-exaggeration, but they probably had like 20 totems. So yeah, just in general, just a ton of button bloat on Shaman in general. I think AOE Shaman, though, probably has it better than Resto Shaman. I think they probably have it better than Enhancement Shaman, just in terms of overall buttons to press, right? So that's a thing kind of unique to Shaman. We also don't have any sort of immunity. So we don't have a Pally Bubble. We don't have like a Hunter Turtle Shell or anything like that. You don't have like a Mage Ice Block. So, you know, not a huge con, but Shaman just in general typically does not have the best defensives overall. And that pretty much just said my last point here. One of the more squishy classes, just kind of a Shaman thing in general. So yeah, let's go ahead and scroll down here and go out to the talent calculator. So you can control left click this talent calculator, open a new tab for you. And you can come out here and view our calculator. So we are running Stormbringer and we're also running Elemental Blast. So Elemental Blast is going to be one of our main Maelstrom spenders, and that's how AOE Shaman works, is you use spells to build up your Maelstrom, then you spend it on your harder hitting abilities like Elemental Blast. And Elemental Blast is really cool because it kind of gives you a buff. If we read the tooltip here, it does a whole bunch of damage, and then this is going to increase your critical strike, haste, or mastery by a certain percentage for 10 seconds. So kind of think of it as this like buff that you're trying to maintain. Now, another major spender that we have is our Earthquake at 60 Maelstrom. You simply place it on the ground. It does a whole bunch of AoE damage. Highly recommend to put this in some sort of @cursor macro. I have one pulled up right here. So show tooltip, cast @focus earthquake. You don't have to have the focus in there. You can just do cast earthquake. But you know, something like that, because you're casting Earthquake so much in your rotation, you don't have to be left clicking Earthquake 200 times by the end of the dungeon. It's going to save you clicks. It's going to make things kind of flow better if this is in an at cursor macro. So do whatever you want. Just a tip there. We also have Elemental Fury, and this is one of the reasons that Critical Strike is so good on Ellie Shaman, is because our Critical Strike just gets more value. So our crits hit for 250% damage instead of the normal 200%. We're also running our Storm Elemental here on a 2.5 minute cooldown. We're actually running a talent that makes them quite a bit stronger as well. Primal Elementalist. This is going to make them 80% more powerful. Then another main cooldown that we're running here is going to be our Stormkeeper on a 1 minute cooldown. Be very careful with this spell because what it's going to do, it's going to make your next 2 Lightning Bolts or Chain Lightnings instant cast and do 150% more damage. So 2 instant cast Chain Lightnings right off the bat that Critical Strike or that have potential to overload is the perfect recipe to accidentally pull aggro from your tank and kill yourself. I see it all the time with Ellie Shaman players. So just be careful, hold off for just a second or two before you use this, because this will rip threat, especially if there's any sort of gear difference between you and your tank. So key cooldown there. We're also running Aftershock, so just kind of RNG here, but we do have a chance to refund some of our Maelstrom from our spenders. We're also running Ice Fury here, and this is going to replace your Frost Shock with something called Ice Fury, and we're really using Ice Fury to manage a buff. So we have something called Fusion of Elements here. So after casting Ice Fury, the next time you cast a damaging nature and fire spell, you additionally cast an elemental blast at your target 60% effectiveness. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to weave these Ice Furies in, and we're trying to proc these Fusion of Elements. So this is really nice because this is going to allow us to proc Elemental Blast essentially, and also proc the stat buff that we get from it. Now we also have over here on the right Master of Elements. So casting Lava Burst increases the damage or healing of your next nature, physical, or frost spell by 15%. So you want to be careful with this. Mainly, you just want to make sure that you're not accidentally wasting this on your Flame Shock. But I want to use this on something that's going to hit harder than Flame Shock. So just kind of be careful with it. Now, most of the time, we're trying to pair this, especially in single target, we're trying to pair this with our Elemental Blast or in AoE, our Earthquake. So I do want to talk about Earthquake a little bit more. I should have talked about this earlier. We are running down here at the bottom something called Echoes of Great Sundering. So after casting Earth Shock, your next Earthquake deals 120% additional damage. After casting Elemental Blast, your next Earthquake deals 140% additional damage. So typically what you're trying to do is you're trying to use Elemental Blast in AoE scenarios. You're using Elemental Blast to give yourself the stat buff, and then we're also using Elemental Blast to buff our next Earthquake. So it does kind of feel awkward in single target because you're like, why am I casting Elemental Blast? It's just giving me a small stat buff, and it just does single target damage. But Elemental Blast procs Echoes of the Great Sundering, which makes our next Earthquake do a ton of damage. So in AoE scenarios, it's worth it to, put an Elemental Blast before that Earthquake, because you're kind of double dipping into the 140% additional damage as well as the stat buff from Elemental Blast. Now, another thing I want to quickly talk about is our Mastery Elemental Overload. So this is going to increase all elemental and physical damage by 6%, but this also is going to give us a 15% chance to trigger a second cast on the same target, dealing 25% normal damage and generating less Maelstrom. So long story short with this is you send out a Chain Lightning, it's got a percentage chance to proc again at lesser value, but it's a free cast, it doesn't incur the GCD, so it's essentially just free damage, right? So if we go back and we just type in Overload here, you can see that this entire middle section kind of synergizes with our Mastery. Now, we talked earlier about why Critical Strike is good, right, due to Elemental Fury, but this right here is why Mastery is our main secondary stats, because we have so many talents here that synergize with that Mastery. Now, we can also trigger our Overload with some of our main spenders. Earthshock, Elemental Blast, and Earthquake can now trigger our Mastery Elemental Overload at 50% effectiveness. So instead of the base, I believe it's 25% damage, our main spenders can now proc it at 50% effectiveness. And not only that, if we are running Echo Chamber, increases the damage dealt by your elemental overloads by 40%. So now we're just getting very close to where our overloads are basically doing, very close damage to just a normal cast. So again, that's why Mastery is so important on Ellie Shaman. One more thing I want to talk about is Lightning Rod. This is going to be the last thing I talk about in the elemental tree. So if you look at the bottom here, that's the elemental section. Make your target a lightning rod for 8 seconds. Lightning rods take 10% of all damage you deal with Tempest, Lightning Bolt, and Chain Lightning. So what you want to do, especially like an AoE scenario, is you want to be kind of tab targeting through different mobs as you cast an Earthquake or as you cast an Elemental Blast, because we want to spread out this Lightning Rod proc. Now, this is not something I'd focus on right out of the gate, but once you get a little bit more comfortable with your rotation, this is something that I would look into, is spreading out these Lightning Rods, because all these targets are going to take additional damage from those chain lightnings that we're putting out. Okay, next thing I'm going to talk about here is Stormbringer. So Stormbringer, we are running Tempest. So every 300 Maelstrom that we spend replaces our next Lightning Bolt with Tempest. So Tempest does a ton of damage, and this is something that we will want to try to line up with our Stormkeeper. So Stormkeeper says, right, charge yourself with lightning, cause your next 2 lightning bolts to deal 150% more damage. And it also causes 2 lightning bolts to be instant cast. And then not only that, they will trigger an elemental overload on every target. So since our lightning bolt is replaced with Tempest, we can use Stormkeeper for those instant cast Tempests that will overload. So you want to pair Tempest with your Stormkeeper as well as your Ascendants, which I forgot to cover. And that's going to be kind of like your burst window, is whenever Tempest becomes available, go ahead and Stormkeeper and then Ascendants. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the rotation. You don't want to hold on to your Tempest or anything to line up with Stormkeeper. Just when it happens, just make sure that you are syncing those two up as much as you possibly can. We also have other ways to proc our Tempest. We can also proc it through our Awakening Storm. So Lightning Bolt and Straight Lightning have a chance to strike your target for X amount of nature damage. Every 3 times this occurs, your next Lightning Bolt is replaced by Tempest. Another thing that's pretty interesting about Tempest is Arc Discharge right here in the middle. Tempest will cause our next 2 Chain Lightnings or Lightning Bolt spells to be instant cast until 40% increased damage. Okay, let's go over Ascendants really quick as well. I forgot to cover this. This will be the last thing that we cover here. Transform into Flame Ascendant for 15 seconds, instantly casting a Flame Shock and a 100% effectiveness Lava Burst at up to 6 nearby enemies. So when you press this, Flame Shocks are going to spread out and then Lava Bursts are going to spread out. Also, while Ascendant Elemental Overload damage is increased by 150%, and spells affected by your Mastery Elemental Overload cause 1 additional overload. So this is really good because we can guarantee overloads through our Stormkeeper, which can then be paired with our Tempest, and it kind of creates this like chain reaction of just insane burst damage. So this is really good to use on certain bosses where they have like a percent damage increase. So I'm just thinking first boss of Motherlode. I'm also thinking first boss of Floodgate. They each have like those 8-second windows where they take 200% increased damage. So if you can pair these cooldowns or this overload sequence with that 8-second window, along with something like Lust, that is where you're going to see an insane spike of damage. And little tweaks like that's going to take you from a good LA Shaman to a great LA Shaman. Because not all DPS specs are allowed to control their burst windows as good as something like an LA Shaman. Quick, snappy, it doesn't require much setup. You just press the buttons and it happens. Unlike something like a Demo Lock that takes like 10 seconds to summon all your pets, by the time you set up your Tyrant window, you lose that damage amp. So it's just really nice to be able to control those windows so tightly on something like an LA Shaman. Okay, I'll shut up about talents. Let's go ahead and move into... Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the rotation. I was just on it. So let's talk about single target first. So we want to use our... Actually, hold on. Let me wait. Let me add our opener really quick. It's not on this specific guide. Let me add that really quick and we'll come back. Okay, so we got 2 different openers here. We got a single target opener and an AoE opener. They're both very similar. So if you remember from earlier, we want to pair our Stormkeeper, Storm Elemental, and Ascendants all together in like one big burst window. The reason we want to do that is because we want to try to cheese the overload mechanic as much as we possibly can, and we want to funnel that into our hardest hitting abilities. So, something like, for example, a Tempest, we can force overload that through Stormkeeper. So, long story short, send your Stormkeeper, Storm Elemental, Ascendants all together. Go ahead and use any trinkets, tempered potion, whatever. You need to use that as well in your opener. If Ascendants is on cooldown, then go ahead and manually apply a Flame Shock. Because remember from earlier, Ascendants will actually apply a Flame Shock for us. And then from here, we're trying to get as much value from Mastery of the Elements as we possibly can. So Mastery of the Elements here, after we cast a Lava Burst, our next Nature, Physical, or Frost damage is increased by 15%. So we want to get that 15% into each Lightning Bolt that we can. So these Lightning Bolts here are very important because they're both going to be buffed by our Lava Burst, the Master of Elements, along with our Stormkeeper as well. Now from here, you've probably generated quite a bit of Maelstrom, so we'll roll that into an Elemental Blast for the stat buff, and then into a Lightning Bolt. So the AoE is going to look pretty similar. Just know that after Stormkeeper and Storm Elemental, step 3 here, make sure that you're using like any trinkets, tempered potions, whatever, before you go into that Ascendance. And then from here, we are just spamming Earthquake, Chain Lightning, Earthquake, Chain Lightning. You know, no Lava Burst, no Elemental Blast, anything like that. We're just trying to get as much Maelstrom rolling as we possibly can. We can funnel that into our Earthquakes. Now, after your opener, we can go down to the single target priority here. And, you know, once you're decently into your rotation, right, 15 seconds, whatever, you can kind of focus on this list. So what we're trying to do, right, is we're trying to, again, try to sync these 3 up as much as we possibly can. Storm Elemental, Stormkeeper with Ascendance if we can. And we're really trying to fish for those big burst windows as much as we can, right? Now, another thing that we did talk about earlier is when we do get Master of Elements, we want to make sure that we're not accidentally spending that on a Flame Shock and wasting this buff. So we want to maintain Flame Shock, right? But we don't want to, you know, if you have a Master of Elements buff up, go ahead and try to spin that first on something like an Elemental Blast, something like a Lightning Bolt, or, you know, even something like an Ice Fury as well. Just make sure it's not Lava Burst because it doesn't increase the damage of fire damage. From here, we'll go ahead and Ascendance. Again, trying to sync it up with these 2 spells up here. Next priority is going to be Tempest and Elemental Blast. So anytime that Tempest comes up in single target, we're going to make sure that we're using it. We're not really holding it for anything. Just if it comes off cooldown, go ahead and send it, because this has a chance to proc. And if we accidentally, you know, proc this again while we're holding on to Tempest, that's a wasted proc. So we want to get this off our bars as quickly as you can to allow ourselves to proc it again. Up next, we're going to be using Elemental Blast with Master of the Elements. And of course, that is if you do have the Maelstrom to do so. In single target, we are ignoring Echoes of the Great Sundering. So all of our Maelstrom is being funneled into Elemental Blasts. Next priority is going to be our Fusion of Elements buff. That's going to come from an Ice Fury proc. So really to summarize these few steps here, these are all procs. So Tempest is a proc, Master of Elements is a proc, Fusion of the Elements is a proc from Ice Fury, but Ice Fury itself is a proc. So long story short is prioritize your procs and play off of them in single target. And then from here, we're using more of our filler spells, right? Like a Lava Burst, we can Frost Shock if we have any sort of movement. And then finally, Lightning Bolt. So we just kind of go into this sort of generator phase once we've gone through our procs and our main cooldowns. Okay, so for AoE, note that at 2 to 3 targets, we'll be adding in Lava Burst in between steps 5 and 6 here. Okay, going into AoE, note at 2 to 3 targets, we're going to add Lava Burst to step 6. So Lava Burst will just kind of squeeze in right after Echoes of Great Sundering. Just go through the whole list, right? Same sort of deal. We're trying to synergize Storm Elemental, Stormkeeper, Ascendance, all 3 together. Again, we want to line this up with the Tempest if we can, but go ahead and keep using that Tempest on cooldown in AoE as well. For the same reason, right? We want to proc this as many times as possible. Then in terms of our spender, we want to be using Elemental Blast if we don't have an Echoes of the Great Sundering active. And whenever we do use our Elemental Blast or our Earthquake, we want to make sure that we're tab targeting in between different targets to apply our Lightning Rod. So we did talk about this in the talent section, but if you skipped over that, Lightning Rod is going to basically be applied to all these different mobs, and they're going to take 10% increased damage from our Tempest, Lightning Bolt, and our Chain Lightning. So we want to spread that out to as many targets as we possibly can, and you can also spread it with Earthquake, which is kind of a lesser known fact. If you're targeting a specific mob and you put Earthquake down, that mob is going to get Lightning Rod applied to them. Now from here, we'll go ahead and Earthquake if we have Echoes of the Great Sundering. Then after this, of course, at 2 to 3 targets, we'd add in Lava Burst, but let's just assume we don't have, let's say we're at like 5+ targets, we'd skip over the Lava Burst. From here, we'll be using Ice Fury again to proc that Fusion of the Elements buff, and then we'll just default to our filler Chain Lightning for more Maelstrom. All right, that's it for the rotational stuff. Let's go ahead and move down to consumables. So we're running Flask of Alchemical Chaos. Most DPS specializations are running this. This can give us that increased secondary stat. We're also running Tempered Potion along with Algari Healing Potion. I can tell right off the bat that this section is wrong. This came from Enhancement Shaman, so let me update this really quick. Okay, much better. So Algari Mana Oil, Crystallized Augment Room, Feast of Midnight Masquerade, Culminating Blasphemite, and then Quick Onyx. Now, one thing that I'm seeing is a lot of other people are also running Elusive Blasphemite as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. You can run either one if you want the more movement speed or if you want the more damage from Culminating. For Enchants, we're running Greater Rune of the Void Ritual on our helmet. We're running Avoidance on our cloak, and we're running Leech on our bracers. And then we are running Stamina on our boots. On our weapon, we're running Authority of the Depths. We are running a main stat on the chest, Sunset Spell Thread on the legs for intellect and stamina, and then we're running a double mastery on our rings. Embellishments, we're running Darkmoon Sigil Ascension along with the Writhing Armor Banding. Then take a look at our tier set. So your spells sometimes will spawn a Storm Elemental or Fire Elemental, and then casting and Ascendance also triggers this effect. So this does not impact our rotation in any sort of way, neither from the 2 set or the 4 set. Just keep that in mind. Everything that we talked about in the priority stays the exact same. And then look at the 4 set. So whenever we spawn that Storm or Fire Elemental, your Lightning Bolt, Lava Burst, Tempest, and Chain Lightning deal 20% more damage. So basically we have these elementals that are spawning, and they basically just beef up some of our other spells. One thing to note, if we do look at this 4-piece set, so when you summon or extend your Storm or Fire Elementals, so if you have an existing one already out and this procs, this will just extend the duration on it. And then if we go to this graphic here, we can go down to Elemental Shaman and scroll all the way over to the right, and we can see the 4-piece bonus from Season 1 versus Season 2, and you're looking at an 8% DPS increase by, equipping this season's bonus versus last season's. So overall, we don't have the strongest tier set, to be honest. We are on the lower end if we go through all these different numbers here. We're definitely not the lowest, and that doesn't mean that our tier set is necessarily bad, but you're not going to get quite the bonus that you get from something like a Fire Mage. That's kind of like 18%. So just something to keep in mind there. Then going over the general tips section here, we already covered most of this on the guide, so we can skip over that for now. And let's go down to stat priority. So Elemental Overload is very strong because we already talked about that in the talent tree section. And just to show you guys here, if you type in Overload to your tree, you can see all the different talents that line up right down the middle here with Elemental Overload. So even though we're getting, Elemental Fury that increases our critical strike damage, we're also getting Storm Caller that increases our critical strike damage. Mastery still comes out on top just due to how many talents it synergize with Overload. And then not only that, but we do get increased Maelstrom generation when we do Overload. So there's just too many things going on for Mastery for us to focus over Critical Strike. Now, Critical Strike still is very good. You can see here that we get almost closer to 300% increased Critical Strike just by adding up all the different Critical Strike bonuses that we get from our tree. But the downside of it is Lava Burst does always crit. So Critical Strike chance is not going to give us any more value on Lava Burst. And then depending on what you're prioritizing, either haste or versatility. So haste if you're wanting more damage, and then versatility if you're wanting a little bit more survivability. All right, guys, that's going to be the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing to the channel. Again, we do also have a Patreon page if you did find some of this information useful. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one.